The recurring scenes of scattered dead bodies in the streets of Philippi, Mitchell's Plain, and Inyanga are unbearable. We are in process to approach Cabinet to consider a firearm amnesty period with an objective aimed at reducing the number of illegal firearms, provide firearms owners with opportunity to hand in unwanted and illegal firearms.
Well, good evening and welcome to Unfiltered on SABC 3 and Channel 404. I'm your host, Desiree Chauke. The deployment of soldiers this week to assist police in the gang-ridden areas of the Cape Flats has drawn mixed reactions from different quarters. Many, especially community research experts and academics, have slammed this as a temporary solution which does not take into consideration the daily conditions in the Cape Flats and surrounding areas. Poverty, lack of skills and the scarcity of jobs are just some of the things that have been blamed for the gang violence and drug abuse in communities such as Philippi East, Hanover Park as well as Manenberg. But for those affected by the violence, it's been 2 days of a respite from killings and uneasy calm. Tonight we ask to what extent are you affected by gang violence where you live? We're joined in the studio by Adele Kirsten. She's the director at Free South Africa, and from our Seapoint studios we joined will be joined by Nicole Jacobus, community member, to talk to us about her lived experiences, and then later we'll be joined by Charity Monareng, who is the Parliamentary and Policy Research Officer at TB HIV Care and is actively engaged on high-level advocacy work for drug policy reform in South Africa. She's also done research focused on youth involvement in gangs in Lavender Hill in Cape Town and Westbury in Johannesburg. So those will be our guests, but we also encourage you to join us in our hashtags at SABC News Online and SABC News Unfiltered on both Facebook and Twitter. Let's get right into it. Welcome, Adele. We saw those soldiers in their fatigues and big military cars, but the big concern here, as someone from Gun-Free South Africa, is that aspect of the scourge that about gun proliferation. Where do all these guns come from?
Well, I think we need to remember or take note that most guns used in crime are illegal. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, where do they come from? So most guns, most illegal guns, were once legal. They were once legally possessed. And in a country like South Africa, illegal guns really have three main sources. It's through fraud and corruption in the licensing system, and we can talk more about that. The other is cross-border trade, and currently more weapons moving from South Africa north of our borders rather than the other way around. And then the third and the most significant is the daily loss and theft of weapons from civilian-owned. That includes private security, it includes civilians, and it also includes police and the military. And we have something like over 20 guns lost or stolen every single day. And so that's the biggest source of illegal weapons. So weapons that were once legally owned, moving into now the illegal,
onto a different stream.
Yeah, and so what that
signals... And in that case, they can't be traceable.
That's exactly the point about illegal weapons, is once a weapon leaves the legal market, you can't trace it, you don't know who's got it, you don't know who's using it for what purpose.
Nicole, let's bring you into the conversation here. Very good evening to you. Because you're part of the Grassy Park Community Forum, you're at the coalface of this problem. Were any military personnel deployed to Grassy Park this week?
Not at the moment. They haven't been deployed into our areas such as Parkwood, Lotus River and Ottery. But however, we would like them to come into our communities.
There's that conversation, which some has said is too academic, where people work with research and not recognize the reality of the need. Why do you feel that you would like them to come through?
Merely the mere fact, if they come into our communities, it will bring stability to our communities, and it will give the NGOs in our areas and the social workers opportunity to work better, because currently we have children that can't even go to school during these gang warfares, and members of the public that need to get to work, they need to first phone home to find out is it safe to come back into the community. And we don't see why people should be living in this type of environment. It's not something normal for us, but now it's becoming a part of society which is a bit unfair onto the community.
How severe is the problem? Are people living in fear?
Definitely people's living in fear, because you're not sure if you come home from work if it's going to be one of your loved ones that has been killed or shot. And it's just unsafe for our youth that must go to school. They can't do programs in the areas because they are scared that they might get hit by a bullet.
Give us a sense of you, a community worker, the kind of work you have to do, the kind of trauma that you are exposed to on a daily basis.
When we go into the community, we patrol the areas, into the hotspots of the areas. We're not sure if we're going to come out there alive or not. We're not sure if we're going to get stoned by the bad element. Even with our police force, they have to go and work in these rough areas. They're not sure if they're going to come home to their families at the end of their shift.
Yeah.
They go in there fully armed, but we never know who's coming home to their loved ones. So it's sad, it's frustrating that you have to live in a community like in this type of environment, I would say.
Even as we speak to you now, you look a bit shaken. We've dealt with such conversations with communities of West Perry before, where people would say, you know, I'd rather not speak to media because it could affect me later. Are you having such concerns tonight?
No, I'm not having any such concerns. As mayor, we want to educate people, the community out there. We would like to see people turn around their lives and go into a better direction than lead to the bad. So if we can take one person off the street and change their life around, that would be a good thing for our community.
In your interactions with both community members, and I assume you reach out to gang members as well, what is leading people to this lifestyle?
The one thing that's leading gangsterism is the poverty. There's no work for our young people out there. So the option that they would turn to would be most likely gangsterism, leading to drugs. They could matriculate. There's no work for our youth out there, so that's the next option that they turn to. Also, the stability of the family home that they come out of. Something has triggered them to lead and to go into that direction.
So as you have an opportunity today to talk to not only members of your community, but the country as a whole, because we might be shining the spotlight on the Western Cape, but gangsterism is a national problem. What sort of solutions have you been able to come out with?
So we've decided, or solutions that we could come up with, is bring the army into our areas. Let us work with the army and let our NGOs do more programs around and educating our community and youth around gangsterism. And merely we need to create more jobs in our communities.
Nicole, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight. Nicole Jacobus is with the Grassy Park Community Forum, just giving us a first-hand account of people who have a lived experience of dealing with gangsterism. You're watching Unfiltered. Let's take a break. We'll be back in a moment.
Now, in 1963, Nelson Mandela, Ahmed Kathrada, Dennis Goldberg, and Andrew Mlangeni were accused of treason and stood trial.
We are standing in a spot with so much history.
This was actually the headquarters of the South African Communist Party.
The climb will be in celebration of 10 years of Nelson Mandela International Day.
What lies ahead of this climb as we live today is a big mountain.
Why did you decide to be part of this initiative?
The reason why I'm doing this is because I really believe in education and the doors it can open for you.
So education is the gateway.
Yes, actors today, the young actors, Kibo, Sibinki. We used to take advices from Abata.
We do not just speak. We let every voice in our nation find full expression in language and in culture. We do not just teach. We empower all people with education. We do not just bring you the news. We place you where the news is happening. We do not just entertain. We take you on journeys. We do not just broadcast sport. We create an arena for sporting heroes to inspire you. Ours is not just a job, it's a calling to ensure that everyone in our nation is informed, educated, and entertained. We're able to do this because you do your part. SABC TV licenses. It's all made possible by you.
The people that are in the country and even those that are in
Mr.
outside the
Mendoza, and
country.
say those who are protesting were saying that they are engaged in the government poverty. How do we resolve that?
Data is one of our major challenges, even with the implementation and measurement of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Is the continental body fulfilling its mandate in terms of peace and security?
They have not been consistent. There has been no political will. A huge fault. A huge body with no teeth to solve African problems.
We're not gangsters, so why don't they do their jobs there? Why innocent victims? So I'm not, it's a good thing, but not once it affects innocent people.
They should not treat us as criminals. They should be going into the area and doing what they need to do with the criminals.
Kids on the end of the day are suffering, and so I think it's a brilliant idea that we're actually glad that they are here.
Welcome back. That was just a look at some of the thoughts of community members on the presence of the military in their surroundings. And let's reconnect again with Adele. Adele Kirsten, you're a director at Gun Free South Africa. Guns are only but one aspect of this problem. There's an article that's been written about the number of knife wound victims that come into Grooteskier on a regular basis due to gang violence. How do you separate these two areas?
Well, they are integrated because it's a demonstration of high levels of violence and interpersonal violence, in particular in our country. But when you look at the data, and Gun Free South Africa is data-driven or led, is that certainly in the Western Cape now, over the last 4 or 5 years, gun-related deaths are overtaking stab deaths. The reason guns are different to any other kind of weapon is that they are much more lethal. And if you talk to trauma doctors, the cost of repairing someone who comes in with a gunshot wound is much bigger than a stab wound. Also, you know, 1 in 55 people who have a stab wound can die. Something like 1 in 3 who get a gunshot wound die. And so guns are much more lethal. They kill more people more easily. And research both here in South Africa and elsewhere in the world shows that reducing the availability of guns is one of the quickest ways to reduce our violent death. It makes a massive impact. And the reason you're seeing this kind of dramatic surge of gun-related violence in the Western Cape is because over the last 10 years, there's been a massive influx of illegal weapons to gang leaders. So we're seeing a very direct correlation between increase in gun deaths and increase in gun availability.
Perhaps at this point, let's bring in our next guest, Charity Monareng. You're a parliamentary policy researcher. Your work is also based a lot on data. What does this data say about the link in terms of violent gangsterism and corrupt police officials?
A lot of what my research found was that a lot of the gangs, it's basically a network, and so a very lucrative network at that. And so the availability of guns it mostly relates to turf wars and having to protect their turfs when it comes to making profits with drugs.
But how do you link the demand and supply? Where are these guns coming from?
So the guns come from corrupt police in some cases. In some cases we have gangsters making their own weapons and also weapons coming in from outside of the country. So we can't really pinpoint which parts of the world the guns are coming from. But what we have found in research is that gangsters do tend to steal weapons from police, and corrupt police also sell their weapons to gangsters.
Tell us some more about this illicit economy that you're talking about, where you're saying there's a lot of money to be made here.
Okay, so with the heroin trade at the moment, and for many years, heroin has become it's a very high dependency drug, and so the demand for heroin in the country has increased, which has made that a very economically viable economy for gangsterism. And it's like a business. So if you have a product that is going to bring you money, you want to tap into that. And because of the high demand for drugs and even weapons, gangsters have found that niche, and so that's how they're making their money, and that's the link that we have.
So the one concern that has been brought up over and over again is about the corrupt practices of police, and that's why the army is being brought in. But it raises another question. How immune are army personnel from corruption? Can they not be bribed?
I'm really not sure if they can be bribed because, as the country, we're not very aware of the training that the army does go through. And, it also raises questions and also gives communities even more reason not to trust the police by having the army come in, and even undermines the police's authority, which is not what we need at the moment. And so we can't really speak on how malleable the army is when it comes to being corrupt.
Yeah. There is a criticism that has come through about why so much emphasis on crime and gangsterism in the Western Cape when this is a national problem. Give us a sense in terms of your studies and numbers, the incidence of this kind of particular crime in different parts of the country.
So my research was based on gangsterism in Westbury in Johannesburg and in the Western Cape, particularly because the two communities are very similar in their structural makeup and economics. And so what I found in Westbury is that they have more of a drug problem as opposed to having a gangsterism problem. And it's also a network, because the research that I did, I found that a lot of the young people were saying that the drugs were brought into Westbury by gangsters from Cape Town. And similar things were said in Lavender Hill, where young people were saying that drugs were brought into into Lavender Hill by gangsters from Joburg. So it's a network in and of itself, and so having to address the problem nationally would be beneficial, as opposed to only looking at where the violence is happening now, and only targeting one community is not gonna. It makes it very easy for gangsters to move from Western Cape into Johannesburg or into other communities that are not being policed at the moment.
So why is it so much more pronounced in the Western Cape?
I think it's more pronounced in the Western Cape because, it's a very long history of how gangsterism has flourished in the Western Cape, but mostly because of the forced removals of the colored communities. And so the dismantling of families in the Western Cape the gangsters at the time were a direct retaliation to the political atmosphere at the time. And so just trying to find a sense of belonging and building this family, and unhealthy families, to say the least, really made it possible for gangsterism to flourish, particularly in the Western Cape.
All right, you're watching Unfiltered. Let's take a break. When we return, we conclude our conversation. Unfiltered, and as we wrap up our conversation, we'd like to look at some of the tweets that you have sent through in terms of taking part in this conversation. At Malwandle saying deploying army is a temporary solution. Minister of Police General Bekele should place undercover cops that will stay with these gangs, study them, and get all the information of where they get these guns and drugs from. Right, Nazim Khurudbom saying, I think it's a lasting solution to Cape violence, and not only the violence and the crime that is happening around those areas. Soldiers will help the police in many ways. At Vincent, or rather at Da Vince 2, saying communities must work closely with police and police must earn trust from communities. All right. That's the last one, and we continue with our conversation. Adele Kirsten, director at Gun Free SA. It's all good and well to speak about the prevalence of guns in communities and how they get there, but how serious is this problem?
It's a massive problem. It's an epidemic. We've got 23 people who are shot and killed every single day in this country, and it's worse in the Western Cape. The numbers are higher on a daily basis, and so what one's seeing with the deployment of the military is, in a way, it's a crisis. It's a crisis response to a crisis. It's an urgent response to a crisis. What's critical is that they use this moment to actually make a massive impact of mopping up the weapons that are in circulation. So to remove them, to get rid of them, and once they're removed, to take them through the usual process of checking against crimes, etc., ballistics, and then to destroy them and get rid of them.
Several projects of removing the guns from the community. At one point, a huge, massive pile of guns was burnt. Sometimes they have a program that the general has been talking about to say anytime soon he'll be inviting people to voluntarily hand in guns. Is it helpful?
It's very helpful. It finally removes a weapon from circulation. It means that once you've destroyed the weapon, it cannot go back into illegal circulation or back into the illicit market. So it removes it completely. I think SABC should be doing this more often. And the key thing is, once the weapons have been recovered and they're ready for destruction, that's often when weapons are most vulnerable to be moving into the illicit market. And the nature of the trade is that there's money to be made on this. And so everyone is at risk. People are tempted, and the role of SABC is to reduce the risk of weapons moving from the legal to the illegal market.
Charity, one community member, Mzambo Jika, who wrote a public letter, was saying that he raised a few points, but one of them was that most of the victims are women. Did you find this in your research?
I never really focused on women as such, but it would make sense for the victims to be women, mostly because a lot of the homes in areas that are marginalized in general are female-headed homes, and so it's very difficult to not have a person to protect you and to fall victim to being a woman, because we're not protected in our communities and in society in general. So it's a very viable argument.
What were some of the outstanding outcomes of your research that we can? What takeaways can we go away with tonight?
My research found that at the heart of it is that we need to start having conversations with communities and engaging with organizations within communities that actually do work, because a lot of what is said is that there's nothing being done in communities. And so it's very heartbreaking to hear that police are just going in and doing things, and government is also deploying services or programs without consulting communities. And also young people need to be educated on alternatives to gang violence and gangs in general, because all they know is what they are told by their parents. So they also believe that the army is a good solution without having known that going to social development, for example, social development could do much greater good for them than the army would.
Thank you so much for talking to us tonight, and thanks to our viewers. It's a bigger problem that can't be solved in one conversation, but thanks to all our guests, Charity Munaring, Parliamentary Policy Researcher, TB HIV Care, and Nicole Jacobus, who we spoke to earlier, who is part of the Grassy Park Community Forum, and Adele Kirsten, Director at Gun Free SA. We're running a poll. As we close, let's take a look at the result of that poll and how our viewers feel about the conversation tonight, where we were asking you, is a lasting solution to gangsterism and violence in the Cape Flats possible? 61% of you say it is, which is quite encouraging, and 39% of you not really convinced. Thank you so much for your participation in the show tonight. My name is Desiree Chauke. Till next time, bye-bye.